Scots Vyce Squad, giving voice to Scotland's character and characters. This episode gives voice to Martin Morrison of the Royal Oak Society of Scotland, modern-day Jacobites. What's that all about? Here, Martin tells us in his own words. I'm here with Martin Morrison, who is a modern-day Jacobite, aren't you, Marty? So, what does that entail? I believe you've got a thing coming up this weekend?
Yeah, this weekend is the anniversary of the Battle of Falkirk, the second Battle of Falkirk. Purists out there will tell you that the first Battle of Falkirk was the one fought William Wallace. The second Battle of Falkirk was fought in 1746 with the Jacobites against the British Army. And it was a resounding success for the Jacobites. In fact, the last battle the Jacobites could claim as victory.
Amazing. And so what do you do for that?
Basically what we do is we're going along and we're remembering the day, we're remembering the fallen, we're remembering the point in history, because being a modern day Jacobite is all about keeping the message alive. Why did it happen? What were they doing? What was it all about? And there's many different points of view on this, and it's a difficult one to navigate for people that are not involved in the modern day Jacobitism. But it's extremely important to us to make sure that we try our best for anybody that does want to know the story, that we help them to understand it and what happened at that time.
And are you a political movement today? Are you looking to change the monarch?
The group that I'm part of, Royal Oak Society, we're not a political movement at all. And no, we don't. We no longer push for absolute monarchy. Absolutism is something that was right for the time then. It's not right for the time now. What we believe is in the justice of the movement. The plain truth of the matter is that what was put down as a glorious revolution was anything but. It may have been welcomed and appreciated in England, but it certainly wasn't in Scotland, and it certainly wasn't in Ireland. So you've got two different sides of the coin there. You have some people that will say it was a bloodless revolution. It was in England. It certainly wasn't bloodless in Scotland nor in Ireland, where we know about the battles that the Jacobites fought. So it's a long, tangled, difficult history to explain, and part and parcelly the job that we do is having these commemorations to remember the battle date, but also to bring people along where we get a better chance to explain the story, tell them our narrative, because there's always two sides to a story. And it's often the case that once you start to prove points to people that they have eureka moments. They're like, oh my God, didn't understand that, didn't believe that, didn't know that this was the whole story. Basically that's what we try to do. That is a modern day Jacobite. It's somebody that believes in what was right and true and proper then, particularly the Scottish side of it, because there is Jacobites in the sort of north of England, and we've got members that worldwide. There is lots of people out there that actually still believe, but putting it into a modern day context is really important for us, and that's what we try to do.
And so what would you like to achieve? If you could achieve one thing, what would it be?
Well, think about it as a murder trial, okay? If you have a murder trial for somebody that's long since passed, you know that you can't achieve the end result, but you can still do the right thing. You can bring the right story to the fore.
Yeah.
And basically what we're trying to do is bring the Jacobite story into today, point out the rights and wrongs, and we've had an uphill battle since the events Outlander came along, because it's been actually a blessing and a curse. A blessing in this respect that it's brought a lot of people to the story, a bit of a curse because of the way that they portrayed some of the characters, particularly Charles Edward Stuart. The internet, particularly Facebook and such, is full of experts, and it's very easy to find them, people that will come on and they're protagonists to whatever your point of view is. And it's always strange if you make a page or if you do something and you're trying to help people that are interested in what you're doing, the equal, if not more, volume of people that will come along are protagonists of that point of view, and they'll do everything they can to bring it down. So that makes your job very difficult, okay, because you've got a lot of people out there that are still shouting, oh, this, that, and the next thing, he was a wee Italian, blah, 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 blah. Now, we know exactly what the prince was. We know his faults. We know why the movement started. But there's a far bigger spectrum of reasons, and there's a far bigger spectrum of people that were involved than somebody that's just coming to the story would realise. Okay, and one of the myths of the prince is the caricature of the prince that is portrayed in Outlander, because he certainly was, from our knowledge and the facts that we have gathered, he was certainly nothing like that.
What would you say he was like?
Well, we know that John Roy Stewart, who it's funny, John Roy Stewart is credited as one of the most noble, participants in the Jacobite risings. Everybody loves his poetry, everybody thinks he was an honest man, a very brave man, and his deeds are never challenged. And yet he describes the prince as being taller than the average man, of a broad set. Now I can only imagine that taller than the average man must have put the prince in the region of 5'10". Some people think just under 6 foot. Broad set. Now I don't know how many of the viewers have ever been to Dunvegan Castle, but if you go to Dunvegan Castle in Skye, you can see the prince's clothes. Now we know that the prince's clothes because when he escaped, the clothing that he had was ushered away and it was kept in Dunvegan Castle. Now, I've taken a tape measure and I put it across the chest of the waistcoat of Bonnie Prince Charlie, and he wasn't a small man.
Right.
His shoes were at least, I would say, a size 10. I've never seen a 5'4" man with size 10 feet, It just doesn't make sense. So there are factual accounts out there, and there's evidence as well, if you dig deep, that he was not a small man. He was, we know he was brave. We know that he was challenged quite a few times for the daring things that he wanted to do. He was perhaps misguided, and he was perhaps, not always considerate of other people.
So would you say he was a tough guy?
I would say that Charles Edward Stuart was inside a reasonably tough, hardy sort of bloke. If you think about how long he went on the run in the Hebrides, sleeping in caves, sleeping out in the open, nobody could survive that. I've slept out in the open in a place for a night. It's blooming freezing. It's really difficult to do. And the only reason I did it was to try to experience what he went through. I can't imagine somebody doing that for 6 months that wasn't of a hardy spirit. I read an early account. It's never been verified, but I read an early account that the young Charles Edward was interested in hunting. He was interested in boxing. It was a new sport then, but he was certainly interested in it. And he was known to be quite rowdy on his days off, because we have to remember that Charles Edward was schooled from a very young age. He was schooled to be the person that he was. He didn't just wake up one day and become this aloof and this obstinate kind of character. He was schooled with great discipline to be the person he was. He toured the courts of Europe, we know that, and he was told all the time, this is the man that's going to restore the Stuarts' fortune. One thing that we know about Charles Edward as well is the fact that he very, very much loved his father. The letters between him and his father show a deep love and a deep willingness to please his father. Everything that Charles Edward came here to do was in his father's name. So another myth that is perpetuated is that he wanted to be king. It's not so. We know that he wanted to be the restoration for his father's sake. This was incumbent on him because the pressure that was put on him as a child, the pressure that was put on. Can you imagine going around European courts, meeting all these people, and then people saying, you're the one that's going to restore your father's rightful kingdom. That kind of pressure, growing up from that to the young man that eventually embarked on that escapade, to me is incredible. I don't know how anybody at 24, most 24-year-olds can't be trusted to cook a pizza, right? And he embarks on a mission to restore his father's kingdom, and he manages to basically make a mark on world history that I doubt very many people could achieve.
Is there a benefit for Scotland for better understanding his story? Like the warrior king, is there a spiritual dimension? There's
definitely a spiritual dimension to this, because I believe that many people in Scotland have a sense of just, fair play, and telling the truth. Scotland is the only nation in the world that I know that has a division right down almost the middle, if you believe the press, whereas 50% say, believe in Scotland in its old ways, Scotland and as a nation upstanding on its own, and 50% perhaps think that Scotland should be part of this disunited kingdom. Now, we don't try to teach anybody, how to think. The political aspect of that is up to each and everybody that comes along. What we do try to point out is that, we try to counter the negativity that is put on Jacobitism. Now, many unionists will say that, Charles Edward Stuart was a unionist. He wanted, to restore the Union, so therefore he's a unionist. In truth, what Charles Edward Stuart was trying to do was the restoration of what happened before the unions. He wanted to restore the union of the crowns. The King's Manifesto, to put it into context, every political party has a manifesto. In other words, they tell you what they're going to do before they do it. The Jacobites were exactly the same. At Glenfinnan, August 19, 1745, the King's Manifesto was first read out. And it pointed out exactly what was the objective. So the Jacobites were not only there to help restore the true king to his position as king, because he was the legitimate king, Scotland, England, Ireland. They also, within that manifesto, which I tried to publish as often as I can, tells you that Scotland's status as an independent nation, the sovereignty of Scotland would be restored. Now, one of the main reasons that we have protagonists is because they say that it was nothing about independence. Well, it can't be the case if it's in the manifesto. It can't be the case if this was sworn to the people that were following. I don't believe that it went from the 1,800 people that were at the initial rising in Glenfinnan to 9,000 is probably the highest I've seen quoted, that were actually at Culloden. Now, if you have an increase in people joining to that degree, it has to be because they're finding common cause with what's happening. Now, I know that, a lot of Jacobites probably were seeing, getting into the spirit of things. Oh, there's a great rising, let's join, let's go and see it. This should be fun. The adventure would have been a great part for a lot of young men, there's no denying that. But deep down, knowing that they were restoring A, the rightful king, because that was very important, and B, the fact that they were going to restore Scotland's sovereign nation status, I think was the catalyst for so many people joining, and particularly from the northeast of Scotland, below the Highland line. So another myth, that's perpetuated, blown right out of the water. So back to your question, the benefits. Yes, I think that, the benefit to that section of people at that time was that they were daring to dream. They had this dream that they could, do the right thing. They could restore what was wrong. And they didn't care about their protagonists. They didn't care about the people that said, no, we've got this new king, or no, we've got a union now. No, they wanted to do something about it. In my mind's eye, they were like the political activists of their day, like the Yes campaign now. These were guys that wanted change. The only difference is, to get change back then, they had to go into battle, because, as you know, back then nobody had a vote. We got what we were given. So the only way we could effect change was exactly what happened, was a rising. And that's exactly what it was. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a rising of like-minded people trying to do what they thought was the right thing for the country.
And do you think more people would have joined if there had been an obvious better chance of success?
I think that the rising would have been an absolute success if it had been well supported. If there had been a clear indication that the French in particular were going to support, then I think that it would have been a different story. I think the reason that it went wrong is, once the Jacobites crossed over the border and got into England, they realised they weren't going to get the support of the English Jacobites that was promised. I think that that's when it became a different story. And again, this is where myths are perpetrated, because the idea was that nobody runs from a retreating army. Well, you can understand that, and many people have pointed the finger at Lord George Murray, for instance, and says, you know, oh, he was a spy or he was this. I don't believe that, and I don't think that there's many people, and I take the point of view that Murray Pittock, who's my personal Jacobite hero, and he told me personally that Lord George at that particular time was thinking tactically. He wanted to retreat because he knew they could probably take London, but he knew they couldn't hold London. And when you think about it, any general worth his salt thinking that taking a position is one thing, holding it is a completely new kettle of fish. And so that argument is still rages today, and particularly with people that have some knowledge of their own, some people that have got their own opinions about, you know, Scotland, Jacobitism, you know, independence. This whole thing, you know, gets into a melting pot where people come and argue their point of view, and we have to try and take that on board and say, yeah, well, you're perhaps right, but we don't know. And the big thing about Jacobitism now is people try equate what happened then with now, and we can't, because it was a completely different thing, and the context was completely different as well. For instance, I don't think that people today understand how important a king was to the people then. In Scotland, the king would have been a very, very important figure, right? It was somebody that, particularly in the Highlands, we must remember we're talking about an area that didn't have much communication, and they're very, very honourable and loyal people per se. And to me, I think that a lot of people that were in the initial rising when Charles landed are men that would have put the thought into the fact that this bloodline goes all the way back to Robert Bruce via Marjorie Stewart. So it's a very, very long ancient bloodline in Scotland, and I don't think that many Scots at that time would have just been happy to lose that. I think that they would have wanted to keep that if they could. I think that initially that is what sparked the initial support. Certainly with Cameron and Lochiel, I'm pretty certain that that's one of the reasons he knew. You know, it's not the fact that he felt under pressure. I don't believe that he felt under pressure to join the Prince. I feel in my heart that somewhere deep down inside him he knew that it was the right thing for him to do, and that's why he helped to get the whole thing sparked. We could sit and argue about it all day, but that's my take on that part.
So within the Royal Oak, you have all these debates.
Yes.
You have people with different points of view
Yes.
on Lord George Murray, and,
Yes.
and maybe, do people ever consider, had the French supported the Jacobite movement, what they would have wanted?
Yes, I think that it was a work in progress kind of scenario. I think that it was hoped is that an effective change would happen, and then once the effective change was put into place, that things would. Everybody hopes for something better when they're doing something like this, and we know that across Scotland, and particularly the Highlands, might say that the new taxes were a real bugbear for people. Malt tax in particular. We need malt for the whiskey, but and the beer. We need things that were needed were taxed to death, and so I think that was that alone was I suppose it's like us having the council tax today. We're like, oh, we hate that tax. I know that the malt tax was very unpopular then, and I think that the whole idea was that we can build a better society if we're the nation that we were before. A lot of people then, we know, hark back to the fact that Scotland had been doing pretty well for itself for 1,000 years, and we could do so again. One of the things that a lot of people that are antagonists to our point of view is they'll point out that John Preble, a really good book on the Darien project, his version of Culloden. Now, a lot of what John Preble wrote, we've proven is to be incorrect. Mm. So as times move on and new evidence comes forward, we see a new story, and it starts to unfold that some of the ideas that I had then were actually pretty good, pretty factual. And again, I would credit Murray Pittock, and I would recommend that anybody that still has a different point of view should read his book Culloden before they attack us, because we often use that as a Bible. It's like, so for instance, if I have an antagonist on a post that I put up, and he'll come forward and he'll say, yeah, it was all about popery, it was all about this, it was nothing to do with independence. My point of view then is to say that, okay, well, I can argue with you, or I can use the man who is the leading expert in Jacobitism in Scotland, I can use his point of view to argue with you. And that's exactly what I do. I'll say, Murray Pittock says you're wrong, and here's why. And I put a link to the book. Now, normally, what happens is if I put that, it goes silent. Because one or two things if they're serious, they will read the book and they will realise they're wrong. If they're not serious, they just disappear because they've not got any comeback. Most of the people that don't want a positive message attached to Jacobitism are the people who have got an ulterior motive. They don't want, they are unionists, they don't like the idea that it could have been a success, and they don't share the dream that these people had. So they'll come forward with all these negative thoughts. But having that book and being so recent, because Murray is a published author with many, many books, but Culloden in particular points out so many things that can't be argued, right? So it helps us immensely. There's many authors. Quite often we'll have people saying, "Oh, this is a good book," that's a good book. Preble's used quite a lot, particularly older people will say, "Oh, Preble says that's nonsense," and I can say, "Well, Preble's book was 40 years ago. Murray Pittock's books are now. Murray Pittock's using the internet, he's using science, he's using all these things at his disposal that Preble didn't have." And not wanting to sound like the bias or anything, but I also think that we have to take into consideration in the Jacobite story, there's a Scottish context which is completely different from the British context. And most of these people that have written about Culloden happen to be university educated in Oxford or Cambridge or living south of the border, and you get a completely different perspective, right? So what you'll get is you get some authors, and you can tell right away if they call it the Jacobite Rebellion, then they usually have a unionist bias. If they say the Jacobite Risings, we usually have a positive bias towards the Jacobites. Murray Pittock's, in my opinion, is right across his level playing field. He tries to give both points of the story, but he's very good at pointing out the reason why the Jacobites should have been successful.
So Outlander, has that been helpful at all?
Well, it put a lot of money in my pocket, because being a tour guide for quite a lot of years, the Outlander tours were extremely popular.
And you led Outlander tours, did you?
I led Outlander tours, yeah, for the company I worked for, and I've done a couple of private. And most of the people that came along understand that Outlander is a programme for entertainment value, and it has been amazing success as far as, if you could go back 20 years, most people didn't know what a Jacobite was. Now everybody knows what a Jacobite was because of Outlander, so it's been great success that way. It's been great, it's put a lot of people into a job. Where it was detrimental was the fact that often when I was doing the Outlander tours, I would come across other tour guides who I could hear in Culloden field, like you would often be standing with your tour waiting for the tour in front of you to pass, and overhearing them telling the story was often very difficult, because you was like seething, thinking that what you were hearing was incorrect. And it made me think that there's as much of it as a good thing, there's the other side of the coin. There's a lot of guys out there that are still perpetuating the story that they know, or the ones that they've been told. I think that when you get a tour guide that has you can either be non-biased completely and you can give an account of both sides of the story, or you've got a leaning one way or another. And I can't deny, I can't say that I don't have a leaning. I've got a very strong leaning. So yeah, my tours, when if somebody was on the bus and they said and they mentioned old pretender or young pretender, I would say, right, okay, I'm going to stop the bus, we're going to eject a passenger. and I would have the whole bus laughing about it, and I say, okay, you're on a warning, anybody else that calls him that, and I'm going to explain why he wasn't a pretender, because once we got further into the tour I could explain exactly why, you know, there was the Stuart claim was infinitely stronger than the incumbent monarchs that came after, and that's very long and laborious story for a lot of people. You quite often have people on the bus falling asleep because they really don't want to hear that, they just wanted to see where Jamie Fraser lived. So it could be it was a blessing and a curse, is that the right thing? And I would say that the blessing side of it is it brought Jacobitism into everyday speak. Now, that was good for jobs, it's good for Scotland, and it was good for the fact that people brought this whole thing into the fore. The negative side for me is that the author, who admits that she got it wrong, by the way, she used a really bad portrayal of the prince. We know that that's false. It's great entertainment, I suppose, but from the serious side, it's difficult, because if we're doing this job to try help people enjoy their experience, but also to learn, then we have to say to them, right, okay, we're going to have to remember that this is the realms of fantasy, right? Nobody can travel in time, and the prince wasn't really like that. Now, I can't prove or disprove time travel, but I can prove, if you give me the time, I can prove that the way that they portrayed Charles Edward Stuart is incorrect.
Martin Morrison, thank you very much indeed.